So, Pixar's new movie, Elio, just came out in theaters on June 20, 2025. And due to its not very great, or rather lack of promotion, as well as its not so great reactions about the film, the movie ended up being Pixar's worst ever box office and tanking heavily in theaters. As someone in the animation community, I've heard so much discussion about this movie recently, especially as to the reason why Elio became such a flop. My animator friends and I were actually having a full-blown group chat discussion about this topic until my friend was like, you know what? We should wait until Sakuraopal makes a video about this. So now, here I am. Elio just released in Asia literally last week because of, subtitles and language and all of that. So now, after watching it, I can also share my own inputs and make a video about it. So for today, I wanted to talk about all the reasons as to why people reacted so negatively towards the film, but also extending on the topic of what really makes a film good in the first place. Hi everyone, my name is Veda, aka Saku, here on the internet. And for those of you who don't know, I am an animator, and by this time next year, I will be a graduate from Calarts' character animation program. So, due to my school's connections, we often get industry talks showing behind the scenes for different animation studios, and Pixar is no exception. The talent they have in that company is just always mind-blowing to me, and everyone I know who worked/interned at that studio is also the most talented people I know as well. However, Elio. When I watched the movie earlier this week, I remember when the film just ended and then they were showing all of the visual development and concept art and storyboard sketches when the credits were rolling, and my first thought was just, so many amazing people worked on this film, but it was really a waste of talent. Although this movie did indeed receive a lot of hate, this video is no means me joining on the hate bandwagon, but rather I wanted to use this current discussion towards Elio as a way to engage in a meaningful conversation about what makes a good film, as well as giving you guys some of my own artistic/animator input here and there. So yeah, mild spoilers for Elio ahead, even though I think most of you guys won't mind if I spoil the movie just a little bit. The number one criticism I've heard about this movie was Elio's character design. People absolutely despise the bean mouth syndrome, which some people call it the quote Calarts Style, which I think it's so funny to me that people call it that. Anyways, what is the bean mouth/Calarts Style in the first place? Originally founded by Walt Disney and his brother Roy in 1961, Calarts, aka California Institute of the Arts, was a place specifically made to train artists to become skilled animators to work for animation studios, which spawned some very notable alumni, directors, showrunners, and the list goes forth. However, the term Calarts Style was actually first used as an insult in the 2010s by the Ren and Stimpy show creator John Kay, criticizing works made by other Calarts alum to be oversimplified, quote, accusing young animators of regurgitating Disney-esque animation style without mastering the underlying animation skills. But throughout time, the meaning of the phrase was lost, and as the animation style in the 2010s leaned towards a very simplistic way, which often included a bean mouth, people have just been using the term, quote, Calarts Style to describe anything with the round ball and noodle art style. Although many of the shows accused to have Calarts Style were actually created by Calarts alumni, such as Darren Nefsey's Star vs. the Forces of Evil or Alice Hirsch's Gravity Falls, in no way is it as some social media users believe that this particular art style of the bean mouth is favored by the Calarts curriculum and pushed towards its students. In my 3 years of studying there so far, I can confirm I have not seen a single classmate draw in this Calarts style, and the only time I've heard this phrase is when it's brought up as a meme. I actually got to take some character design classes that were taught by the character designers for the said Calarts Style shows. And from their lectures and what I've got is that the true reason why they have a very similar art style that is often very, very simple is just because, especially in TV animation, they cannot afford to animate a more complex style. Every line you add is a line more to animate, and in an art form as tedious as animation, the time really starts adding up. Additionally, with a lot of these 2010s cartoons, a lot of animation is actually outsourced, so it's better to keep the animation style very simple and straightforward so that overseas studios can find it easier to work with. Quote, "The phrase Calarts Style has become a shorthand for a more fair criticism, which frankly is animation as innovation rather than animation as imitation." Animation journalist John Maher says, "But to call it all Calarts is just so silly and reductive and inaccurate, just fundamentally inaccurate." Which, as a fellow Calarts student, I agree. So, the Calarts style really does not exist, but rather it just became the word to describe the cookie cutter style of thin line animation, which I also feel is understandable given that a lot of these shows were expected to have a new episode every week. So obviously, to turn out all of that animation, I think the very simple design is justified. I personally don't have a problem to how the bean mouth looks, and in most cases I do think it's quite charming, like in Steven Universe. Especially in 2D, I think the bean mouth style really works well there. However, with the case of Pixar and the bean mouth syndrome, it's slightly different because Pixar is one of the richest animation studios, and especially utilizing 3D animation and with all animation done in-house, it's very unlikely that they picked out this bean mouth art style just to cut down costs. Aside from Elio, Pixar has been using the bean mouth art style recently, such as Luca, which was released in 2021, and Turning Red, released in 2022. In an interview, Maya Burnett, which is our very lovely director of character animation here at Calarts, said that instead of this being the quote Calarts style, what people are likely identifying is an intentional technique employed by studios, as people, especially people who love animation, can easily recognize and associate a certain style with a certain studio. So it's natural that Pixar would have their own recognizable style in the animation world as well, because it is very important to them both as a brand and as a studio. So who knows, maybe Pixar wanted to be associated and have a branding for the bean mouth 3D look, for better or for worse. Other than that though, there's also an important thing I want to bring up. If there's anything I learned throughout my animation education, it's that other than shape language, one of the most important things in a character design is that the design should really reflect the story and personality of the character. For example, in the 2021 film Luca, I really didn't mind the bean mouth style at all. Luca and Alberta, which are the two main characters, are so cheerful and bubbly, and one of the big themes throughout the movie is the childlike spirit and imagination, which I think is why the big eyes, the round face, and the bean mouth work really, really well, reflecting the playful energy that movie is about. However, for Elio, I feel as though a big reason why the character design didn't work or got so much criticism / backlash is because the character or the story itself was very lacking and not fleshed out in the first place. By now, you might have heard of the messy production behind Elio and how it was meant to be a very different movie in the beginning. According to multiple insiders who spoke to The Hollywood Reporter, reflecting the original director Adrian Molina's identity as an openly gay filmmaker. However, this characterization gradually faded away throughout the production process as Elio became more masculine after feedback from leadership. Gone were the queer themes throughout the film, as well as Elio's passion for environmentalism and fashion, which, spoiler alert, really does not appear in the film. After Molina exited the project due to some disagreements with the studio, the movie was taken over and reworked under the new co-directors Madeline Sharafian and Damishi. Damishi says so herself in an interview that the original idea by Adrian Molina was semi-inspired by his own life growing up in a military base in America, as well as being an artsy kid who didn't fit in. So nothing against the two new directors, and I really think they did the best they could given the circumstances, but just the nature of giving a very personal story to someone else. Of course, a lot of its charm and character in the beginning will be lost throughout the process, which kind of made Elio, in my opinion, a not very well-written character. Other than his obsession of being abducted by aliens throughout the film, after watching the whole thing, I still cannot tell you much about his personality. Other than that, I thought Elio was just not a very likable character in the first place. To me, I understand the feeling of being an outcast, but even so, he was like kind of selfish towards everyone throughout the film, and the motivation for his actions felt very unreasonable. Like, boy, get yourself together. As I mentioned earlier, a good character design will always reflect the personality or story of the character. But when the character itself is lacking in personality, it's very hard to make the character appealing as well. And given how the whole story is about feeling like an outcast and therefore wanting to be abducted by aliens, I don't think the bean mouth would suit him very well, because that smile just usually portrays a more happy-go-lucky, bubbly character. Another debate people had about Elio's character design is that having a human character in general instead of anthropomorphic characters makes it harder for the audience to relate to. I actually have a lot to say about this. Okay, so on one hand, I do think it's easier to relate to anthropomorphic or non-human characters like Finding Nemo or WALL-E or Toy Story, so that the audience can really focus on the character's emotions and motivations instead of the character's background. However, I do think as long as you have a well-written story and character, no matter what the age is or what the culture is, people can still find reasons to relate to that character. Let's take the example of Turning Red, released in 2022, and Coco, released in 2017. They both feature human characters as well as showcasing cultural representations, immigrant Chinese for Turning Red and Mexican culture for Coco. As you can see, I have 0% Mexican blood in me, yet I adore the film Coco so much. Everything about that movie is just so beautiful. And Coco, at least in my opinion, although it's about Mexican culture and it's about Dia de los Muertos, a huge part of that story, the part that the audience can relate to, is the struggle of pursuing one's passion versus family acceptance. The film is about importance of family and discovering yourself through your heritage, which is a pretty universal theme. Now compare this to Turning Red. The main criticism of that film was that it is, quote, totally unrelatable to the general population. Because I'm Chinese myself and I am a girl, even though I'm not immigrant Chinese, I related to a lot of parts of the movie, but I really can't imagine a lot of people liking this film. The story felt very personal to the director, Damishi, but the main theme of that movie is female puberty, which, if you're not female, I think it would be really hard to relate to. Or navigating an Asian parent-child relationship, which, if you don't have an Asian parent, it would be hard to relate to that as well. Although I know some people who love Turning Red, some reviews for the movie include 3 out of 10. Unfortunately, Turning Red failed to do this, instead aiming for a very specific target audience, excluding everyone else in the process. And 1 out of 10. It seems to have been made for Canada's Asian population in Toronto for young bratty tweeny girls. In fact, I actually remember having this conversation with my Chinese Canadian friend who lives in Toronto. I was asking them if they related to Turning Red, and she told me that despite her cultural heritage being almost the same as the main character, she found it quite hard to relate to it as well, because Turning Red was based on a very specific Chinese community in Toronto. Don't get me wrong, having cultural representation is important. I remember being so happy seeing more prominent modern Chinese culture in a Pixar movie. But there really is a fine line between how personal you want the story to get and how much you want your audience to relate to that story. So, I don't think it's about having a human character or not in your film. It's more about if the film's theme is universal, like Coco about family, or WALL-E about the importance of human connection, or Ratatouille, overcoming prejudice to pursue your passions. So now, bringing this back to Elio. what is the theme or message that I took away from that movie? Finding where you belong? Question mark. You see, after watching the movie literally like a few days ago and the movie still being fresh in my head, I cannot answer you. I felt like Elio belonged on Earth just fine in the very beginning in this movie. Like, his aunt clearly loves him and people were trying to become his friends before he got really weird about it. So, I don't know. Maybe because of that I couldn't relate to Elio at all. It's not because he grew up in a military base or he's from America or whatnot. It's just that there were no relatable themes in the film. Now that I think about it, there was like the Gordon plot of balancing your family's expectations versus what you really want for yourself. And I feel like maybe people related to that, but for like Elio's character's like story arc, yeah, cannot think of anything. And another thing I want to mention, when I was watching Elio, I felt as though the entire world/story was very surface level. Like, you could tell they were like dumbing it down for kids. So I found that really hard to sit through, even though I'm someone who usually loves consuming kids media/animation. And I feel like the whole charm about animated movies is not only can the kid find it a very fun experience, the parent in most cases like the movie as well. But for Elio, like, I feel like the movie was only for kids. Whereas I remember when I was watching Soul with my mom, like, she loves that movie and she cried while watching it, even though she was the one bringing us to the theaters. A tweet that went viral recently that sums up this thought is, quote, "If we look back at all of Pixar's films, the general sentiment is that the main shift went from stories about being a parent to stories about being parented." And also, this one YouTube comment I found, quote, "I don't think it's just the art style, it's also the main characters. They're all kids. Pixar used to have toys, dill fish, young adult cars, rats, family retired hero. Now it's just kids with funny issues. And may I add, it's issues that a lot of people cannot relate to." So yeah, just because it's a kids movie doesn't mean that kids deserve a good story. So, what makes a good film? To wrap up this conversation, I feel as though yes, art style is important, having beautiful visuals is cool, but it is really the icing of the cake that enhances the story. A good film to me is that the audience had something to take away, either a message or a theme for the audience to think about after finishing the film. A good film to me is to be able to resonate and sympathize with the characters, rooting for them as well as witnessing their ups and downs, experiencing the journey along with them. And a good film to me, of course, is if the audience is entertained while watching the film, which I can't say I was for Elio. And with that, thank you all so much for watching this week's video. I've been uploading weekly talking about topics I'm very passionate about, from art, animation, psychology, to culture. And as I mentioned earlier, I am an animator, so I post content about drawing as well as vlog my life as an artist occasionally. So if you're interested, please consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel. Your support would mean very, very much to me. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts about this topic, or if you watch Elio, your thoughts on that movie in the comments down below. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye!